So I finally got around to playing Norco, and I use the word finally loosely this time around because this one really hasn't been on my radar until very recently off the back of my recent review of Citizen Sleeper, which it did get me thinking, what other really story-focused games are out there along the same kind of vein that try to achieve the same sort of ends as that game did, and it led me down a rabbit hole to Norco, this surreal point-and-click adventure set in some alternate timeline where the tendrils of dystopia have managed to reach out and touch even the smallest and sleepiest little towns of America. And critics really loved this game, as you can see, boasting an impressive score of 89 on Metacritic, although the fans didn't necessarily reflect the same adoration with a user score of 7.4, which has me interested to investigate why and see mainly whether this game is worth revisiting in 2025. Should you add this one to your backlist, and if it's there already, should you get it off of it? That's what we're going to find out today, and that's what we find out every time here on The Patient Gamer. If you're new to the channel, well, welcome. It's great to have you on board. Please consider maybe liking and subscribing if you do enjoy this content. We aim to play games that are at least 12 months old. We take our time getting around to some of the biggest video games. Yeah, we're going to battle your back catalog one title at a time. That's what we do here on the channel. But right now, it is time to ask the question, as we always do, how does it play today? Look, I'm just going to say straight off the bat, Norco is a weird game, man. A really weird game. And that is both its greatest strength and its biggest weakness. In Norco, you play Kay, a faceless girl who's returning to her hometown in Louisiana after the recent death of her estranged mother, trying to find her troubled and now missing brother with the help of the family robot, a local PI, an oil pirate, and your stuffed monkey, naturally. All the while unraveling an ancient prophecy of apocalyptic proportions. It's mind-bending and intriguing. And the story itself is very enticing in that way. It's full of high-stakes mystery. It's kind of like a book you just can't put down. Although sometimes it does feel like you're trying to read that book while tripping on acid. It doesn't always make a whole lot of sense. In fact, that's being generous. It doesn't make a lot of sense most of the time. And honestly, the less questions you ask, the more fun you're probably going to have. If you like David Lynch movies with a decent smattering of body horror, you're probably going to like this one a lot. But safe to say, yeah, it's a confusing game. And at times you stumble through it in a way that's not too dissimilar from making your way to the toilet in the middle of the night. You're not always sure how you get there, and you'll probably stub your toe a couple of times. But instead of the immense relief that usually meets you at your journey's end, with Norco, it's more like pissing all over yourself just as you start unzipping your pants. Safe to say, I found the ending pretty unsatisfying. If you're expecting any definitive answers to the game's murky story and the countless riddles it poses, you're going to be disappointed. The story is very much drenched in mystique and is as clear as mud. You either like that kind of thing or not. I'm personally somewhere in the middle. I think your story can be both weird as fuck and still make sense. Here though, it just didn't. It never really came together thematically and narratively in a really concise way. It felt like it was building to something bigger, but the ending ultimately felt rushed. The pacing was off, especially in that third act, and the more I think about it, the more underwhelmed I am by it. Norco is wacky, disturbing, and more than once will have you saying, "What the fuck?" to your TV. And if it could respond, it'd say, "Yeah, dude, I know." There are harebrained postmodern concepts that actually feel pretty difficult to square away with any one specific genre. Disturbing AI hive minds built from networks of flesh, and cults run by teenage boys operating out of a local mall. While all this stuff is really stimulating on the surface, I'm still not quite sure exactly what Norco was really trying to say. Luckily though, the writing, even if it is quite esoteric, there is no denying its high level of quality. Arcane and poetic, often impossible to decipher. Some will like this flowery prose, others may find it wearing thin. But personally, I'd really like to see more of this, of developers and writers assuming gamers might actually have an intellect that's a few notches above a monster-chugging 6th grader. It's vivid, descriptive, and does a great job of painting this dystopian picture of Louisiana. You'll feel like you can smell the smells and hear the sounds of these deep South streets. It also goes into such unexpected directions, branching off into strange tangents that often don't seem like they have anything to do with anything. The dialogue is super conversational in this way as well, like one discussion about a man's preference of listening exclusively to Christmas music. But it's these random diatribes that are often the funniest, and yes, the game does have a really great sense of humor, especially when it derives comedy from the dialogue choices. It kind of just knows you're not going to be able to resist choosing, even if they do make you a pretty questionable person for simply asking them. Like when you press one poor soul into telling their tale of not being able to find a bathroom because you directed them to a dodgy hot dog stall. I just love when games point the finger at the player and call into question their shitty intentions in the pursuit of turning over every stone, as we so often do. And on the dialogue, it's abrasive and genuinely edgy. I mean, I hate that word. It usually never means what it actually means, but here it is appropriate. It cuts deep while also really nailing the expressions, slang, and mannerisms of people from this part of America, at least based on the very little I know of that dialect. It seems accurate. Norco is yet another indie title that doesn't have the luxury of voice acting, and if you're not going to have any voice work in your game, well, then the pressure is on double time to make sure your dialogue really brings these characters to life and writes them in a way that's distinct and full of personality, and Norco definitely does this. Most are your salt-of-the-earth southerners and sound just like Joe Blow you'd be happy to grab a beer with, but others have a biblical turn of phrase, which is a too out of place, although some of the more eccentric individuals speak in a refined tongue that's totally at odds with the grounded setting of Louisiana. It's why choosing to make a dystopian gothic mystery in the deep south is such an odd but inspired choice. It's a truly original pairing. That brings me to the setting in the world as a whole, which it really is unlike anything I've seen before. I can't imagine how cool it must be as someone from this part of the world to see it brought to life in a video game like this, especially a place as unknown as Norco, because yeah, Norco, if you didn't know, is a real place in the real world. It's kind of like the devs just threw a dart at a map and said, fuck it, why not, to whatever it landed on. While already rare for video games to use real world locations, unless we're talking about places with instant and widespread recognition, it's even rarer to see somewhere as forgotten and hidden away as this used, which immediately lends Norco a very specific flavour. The world is also realised in a surprising level of detail for a pixel art game. If Norco doesn't particularly reinvent that artistic approach, it still looks gorgeous with some astonishing animation work. While a lot of these games had very static backgrounds back in the 80s and 90s, Norco builds on this one area with backdrops that look real and interactive, like the rushing vista that sprawls ahead of you as you race down a highway, or the almost imperceptible sway of a tree branch in a bayou. Despite its outdated aesthetic, it's once again another tremendous example that shows us this art style may just never die. Art direction in general is just so confident, and I love the blend of reality and sci-fi when it feels so grounded and within reach as it is here. It has some truly demented design and unsettling imagery that honestly is pretty dark. We have to talk about how deeply upsetting some of those character portraits are as well. I mean, just look at this dude. Let's just say, at times, you'll be thankful that this game isn't in a higher resolution. The music as well is just wild. The soundtrack, spectacular, a religious experience almost, with ambience that's transcendent and pervasive, almost overpowering at times, assaulting the senses. Like that noisy neighbor that plays their music too loud, but my God, they've got good taste. I really, really enjoyed this. There is a unique track for every single area of the game, and not a single one that doesn't feel fitting. Like everything else in this game, the songs are just so weird, but also absolute bangers. Like, listen to this shit. I haven't been able to get this out of my head for days, and at this point, I don't know if I ever will. Seriously, I might need help. And I mean, the sound design as a whole, this is probably my favorite feature of Norco. It is magnificent and a well I found myself returning to again and again. It's alive, it's responsive, has this really intentionally glitchy and warped sound like the dying thoughts of a schizophrenic robot. Great atmospherics as well. It's so overstimulating. The swoosh of cars on the street, the insane chattering of a crowd. You feel like you're there, totally submerged from all angles in the petrochemical waters of this world. I strongly recommend playing with headphones on. I happened to do so just by accident. Wow, wasn't that mind-blowing? It just gets better. There's so much weird shit going on here in the background, so many audible oddities. I honestly didn't know what the hell I was listening to half the time, or how they even made this, but I just know that I loved it. It also employs this ingenious little trick to compensate for the absent voice acting, where characters will speak in these distorted sound bites, some of which are really creepy, like this incredibly disturbing dude. Like, when it matches, it just matches, and it instantly gives your imagination just enough to work with in regard to kind of hearing their dialogue. It's a really clever novelty where it almost acts as a type of voice acting, and I really loved this. It's a great example of how the constraints of a budget can actually force creative solutions. But I guess we should probably get to the actual game itself. How fun is Norco to actually play? Well, as innovative and brimming with originality the premise, setting, characters, and story are, gameplay-wise, it's pretty straightforward. I wouldn't say it really does anything too new that you haven't seen or would expect from this genre. There's a couple of decent puzzles that have the complexity of one of those thought experiments on a high school test, just challenging enough to really buckle down and hit the books, but not so much that you ever had to look in the back for the answers. I really love that sweet spot. Every now and then, a few did feel a little spoon-fed, and I kind of wish the developers had more faith in the player's intelligence. I mean, I wish most people had more faith in my intelligence, but otherwise you're doing what you usually do in point-and-click games, which is a lot of pointing and clicking. I mean, it does what it says on the tin. There are some interesting little mini-games to break up its static nature. You'll trawl through the town using an augmented reality app to find hidden statues like a cursed version of Pokemon Go, or piss off an old childhood friend because you caused their cat to literally rocket off into space. Yes, that happens, and it's exactly as hilarious as it sounds, but otherwise it's certainly not a game you play for its fun factor. You're here for, as I said, those artistic elements, which are very strong. One unexpected surprise mechanically was the fact that Norco has combat, which, yeah, not something you'd normally encounter in this genre. Sometimes you'll find yourself thrown into turn-based combat mid-combo, where you'll use a stuffed monkey to attack a sleazy gas station owner using memory puzzles and QTEs. Yeah, I'm not sure how much it enhances the game or really needs to be there. It is pretty basic, and there's really no stakes involved here. You can't die, as far as I can tell. There's no items or any RPG mechanics of any kind, so it's totally just performative. I think it could have been cool to encounter the combat a little bit more often, introducing new mini-games every time. In that way, it kind of did feel a little like Undertale, but only with a skerrick of the same depth. For the most part, though, it's just kind of there, you know, and it doesn't totally justify its existence. And that kind of goes for the game as a whole, as an experience. Norco follows a growing trend of developers dishing up games that compensate for mechanical shallowness with strong narrative and creative elements, characters, writing, themes, concepts, art direction, and story. But I felt especially cheated here because even the story is undercooked and felt unfinished. It didn't feel anywhere near fleshed out enough, which may be by design. Now, I do love that games have the balls to be vehicles for confident storytelling and artistic expression. I've waited years for games like this, and we're seeing more and more of them as time goes on, and I'm incredibly grateful for that, and I still like this game for that reason, and I'm always going to champion a title like this. But as a game with a capital G, strictly speaking, you may be left wanting. I can see why there's a bit of a disparity here between critics and the fans and their reception of this game. This is exactly the kind of shit that critics eat up by the handful, but your average quote-unquote gamer may have a hard time seeing the value here. Still, if you like these kinds of games, and that is a big if you value solid storytelling and you're the kind of person who's always advocating for video games as art, this could very well be your jam. If it's on your backlog, I'd definitely check it out at some point, but I also wouldn't be in any desperate rush either. Hey, if you've made it this far, thanks, man. I appreciate it. We're a small growing channel and every little bit helps, and maybe you might even consider liking and subscribing. We are all about battling your back catalogue one title at a time because it's tough out there. There's only so much time in the day and so many games to play. Let me play them for you so I can let you know whether they're worth going back to, because nothing worse than wasting your time on a game that isn't worthy of it. Let me be your sacrificial lamb. It's the Patient Gamer signing off. Have a wonderful day.